The night my family vanished was the quietest sound I have ever heard. No slamming doors, no angry words, no goodbyes, just an eerie stillness that felt heavier than any scream. I came home to find the lights off, the air cold, and the echo of my footsteps the only thing answering me. The house smelled like dust and lemon cleaner, the kind of scent that follows a move. On the kitchen counter lay a single folded piece of paper under the house key. My father's handwriting, sharp and rushed, carved 4 words that would split my life in two. You'll figure it out. At first, I laughed. I thought it was a joke, maybe a cruel one. But then I opened the pantry empty. The closet's empty. Even the framed family photos that used to line the hallway were gone. It was like they had never existed. My parents, my younger brother Ethan, they had packed everything, even the memories, and disappeared without a trace. I remember standing in the middle of that hollow living room sunlight, bleeding through the blinds, trying to convince myself there had to be some explanation. Maybe an emergency. Maybe they'd call. But hours passed, then days, and the silence grew into something monstrous. I called their phones, straight to voicemail. I drove to their friends' houses, knocked on doors, begged for answers. Nobody knew where they went. One of my father's coworkers finally muttered that they'd mentioned moving to Denver, 2 states away, without me, without a word. The truth landed like a brick to the chest. They hadn't been taken. They had left. They had chosen to disappear from my life completely, as if cutting me out could erase their disappointment. Because to them, I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a failure. Just 6 months earlier, my construction startup had collapsed under the weight of a partner's fraud investigation. My parents had invested part of their savings money they insisted on putting in, though I warned them not to. When the company fell, so did their pride. I remember my father's voice that day, low and bitter. You ruined this family. My mother's silence was worse. She didn't defend me. She just looked through me like I was already gone. Ethan, my golden boy, brother, had watched from the doorway, expression unreadable, before saying, You always wanted to be the hero. Now you're just broke. I replayed those words as I sat on the cold kitchen floor of the empty house, holding that note like evidence from a crime scene. Outside, the street was quiet, the world still turning as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I didn't cry that night, not because I was strong, but because I was numb. I think some part of me had been expecting it the moment they'd decide I wasn't worth the trouble. The next morning, I drove to the bank hoping to find some trace of them, some clue. My name was gone from the joint account I'd shared with my parents. The mortgage transfer had already been signed, dated a week before they vanished. They'd been planning this long before the final argument. The betrayal was deliberate, methodical, and absolute. Standing in that sterile bank lobby pen, trembling in my hand, I realized something with brutal clarity. They hadn't left to start over. They'd left to start clean. Without me. The world didn't end that day, but something inside me did. The woman who believed family meant forever died quietly in that empty kitchen, replaced by someone who would have to learn to survive on her own. I walked out of that house with nothing but my car keys, a box of project files, and the bitter promise etched in my mind. You'll figure it out, and God help me, I would. When I think back to my childhood, the signs were always there. My family didn't just vanish overnight. They had been fading away from me for years, one small dismissal at a time. I was the daughter who filled in the gaps, the one who stayed late to finish chores, the one who patched holes no one thanked me for. My mother used to say, Nora, you're so reliable, like it was praise. But it wasn't. It was a sentence. My father, a stern contractor with a voice like gravel, had a favorite phrase whenever I achieved something: you did well for a girl. When I graduated top of my engineering class, he told relatives that my brother Ethan inspired me to be ambitious. That's how it always was, Ethan as the sun, me as the reflection. I was older, smarter, more disciplined, but none of that mattered. He was the sun, the air, the one they invested in. I was the helper. Even when we were kids, my father made sure the hierarchy was clear. When chores were divided, Ethan was told to focus on his studies. I mowed the lawn, cleaned the garage, handled the family bills once I turned 18. When my first paycheck arrived from a part-time drafting job, I remember handing it to my father because he said it would teach responsibility. He never gave it back. My mother would say, "He's teaching you about sacrifice, Nora." Girls who understand family come first never go hungry. She was wrong. I grew up starving for approval, for fairness, for acknowledgement that I mattered beyond my usefulness. I used to think love meant earning it through competence. When Ethan failed his math class, I stayed up tutoring him every night until he passed. He thanked me by calling me a know-it-all and slamming the door. When he got into college, my parents threw a party and told everyone how proud they were of their brilliant son. I was the one who wrote his essay. When I got my first engineering scholarship offer, my father said, "We can't afford for you to move so far away. Ethan needs you." I gave it up without argument because back then I believed loyalty would eventually be rewarded. It never was. The turning point came when I started my own firm, Bennett Design Solutions. It was small, but promising. I wanted to prove that I could create something meaningful. My father laughed when I told him the idea. Startups are for dreamers, not family girls. Yet when my company landed its first city contract, he was the first to brag to his friends. My parents invested $50,000 not out of faith, but control. They wanted to be able to say they built it too. Ethan joined as a consultant, though he had no background in design. He called it family synergy. In reality, he siphoned resources pitched my clients and bragged about his team's achievements. I let it go, thinking this was how families shared success. But when my business partner Mark embezzled company funds, everything collapsed. The lawsuits were brutal. The press painted me as careless. Ethan's name was conveniently missing from all contracts. My parents went silent. I thought we'd face it together, but instead they started rewriting the story. At first, my father told relatives that I'd ignored his warnings, then that I'd dragged the family down, and finally that I'd lost her mind. It was easier for them to pretend I was the problem than admit they'd chosen the wrong son to trust. I still remember one particular Sunday dinner just weeks before they disappeared. My father talked about selling the house, calling it a fresh start. I offered to help with the paperwork. He waved me off. Ethan smirked across the table. My mother changed the subject, asking if I'd considered taking a break, letting Ethan handle things. That night, I felt something crack inside me. I'd spent years holding the family together, and they were already practicing life without me. Looking back now, their vanishing wasn't an accident. It was the final act of erasure, the moment they made official what they'd been implying since I was a child: I didn't belong. Still, the next morning after I found that empty house, I drove to every familiar place: our church, the diner. My mother loved the construction yard where my father's truck used to sit. Nothing. Even their number was disconnected. When I returned to the silent house, I noticed one last detail. The family portrait that had hung in the hallway since I was 12, it had been replaced by a faint outline on the wall where the frame used to hang, as if they'd scrubbed out the memory of me. That outline stayed burned in my mind, a ghost of what was never real. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was just the space they left behind. The fall came faster than I expected. One moment I was signing contracts and attending city meetings, the next I was sitting across from federal investigators while flashbulbs from reporters exploded outside the glass doors. My business partner Mark had disappeared overnight, along with hundreds of thousands of dollars from our corporate accounts. I was left holding the paper trail. My company Bennett Design Solutions had my name on every document. His name was nowhere to be found. Within days, clients pulled out. Projects were canceled. I spent nights rewriting proposals that would never be read. When I called my parents for help, my father answered once. His voice was cold, rehearsed. "You made this bed, Nora. Lie in it." Then the line went dead. I didn't realize that conversation would be our last. The legal process drained everything: my savings, my reputation, my energy. I sold my car to pay my attorney. I slept on my office floor for a week, surrounded by boxes of designs I would never build. Reporters wrote about me like I was a cautionary tale, another ambitious woman who flew too close to the sun. I could have survived that, but what broke me was learning that Ethan had been quietly meeting with my clients, offering his new consulting firm to clean up the mess. He used my downfall as his pitch. When I confronted him, he shrugged. "It's just business, Nora. You taught me to seize opportunity." My mother refused to take my calls, claiming it was too stressful for my father. I sent them letters. They came back unopened. I kept hoping someone would defend me, just one person. Instead, family friends stopped returning messages. My parents spread the story that I'd mismanaged the money, that Mark's theft was my fault. They had invested $50,000 in my company, and losing it was the perfect excuse to disown me publicly. I overheard one of my father's old co-workers say at a hardware store, "She embarrassed them. They're better off without her. Better off." The words haunted me. The day the verdict came clearing me of criminal charges but bankrupting me in legal fees, I sat outside the courthouse numb. The air smelled of rain and asphalt. People hurried past, clutching umbrellas, living lives that hadn't imploded. I'd lost everything: my company, my friends, my home. But at least I hadn't lost my integrity. That was supposed to comfort me, but it didn't. Integrity doesn't pay rent. That night, I returned to my parents' house, desperate for refuge. The driveway was empty. The blinds were drawn. I rang the doorbell over and over. No one answered. Through the window, I saw the living room stripped bare. The couch, the photos, even the rug were gone. The house echoed when I pushed the door open. That's when I found the note on the counter. Those 4 words that changed everything. "You'll figure it out." I should have screamed, but the only sound that came out was a laugh, broken and sharp. They had planned this. The mortgage transfer, the missing furniture, the canceled utilities, it had all been arranged before the trial ended. I wasn't a casualty. I was collateral. In the following days, I tried to track them down. Their numbers were disconnected. Their neighbors claimed they'd moved to Denver for a clean slate. I checked Ethan's social media. New city, new clients, new life. No mention of me. It was as if I had died. The last piece of evidence was a bank statement I found in the mail, forwarded by mistake. It showed that the joint account once shared between me and my parents had been closed and every cent transferred to an account under Ethan's name. That was the moment it hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't left because they were ashamed. They left because they'd already taken what they wanted. Family was never about love. It was about ownership. And when I lost everything, I stopped being worth keeping. I don't remember the first night clearly, only the sound of the rain hitting the windshield as I sat in my car outside the closed diner, wondering where I'd sleep. The house was gone. The bank had taken my last savings. The company name I'd spent years building now belonged to a liquidation notice. I had nothing but a duffel bag and the bitter taste of betrayal sitting heavy in my chest. For the first few nights, I parked in the back lot of a 24-hour storage facility, using my car seat as a bed. I'd wash up in public restrooms, eat whatever I could buy from vending machines, and pretend I still had a life to return to. But the illusion cracked fast. By the end of that week, I sold the last thing of value I owned, my laptop, for $200. With that, I rented a small storage unit to keep my remaining things. It became my new home. The irony wasn't lost on me. An engineer sleeping in a metal box. A designer with no space of her own. I learned how to slip in after hours to shower at the YMCA to ration granola bars like gold. Some nights, I'd stare at the flickering light above the unit and whisper to myself, "You'll figure it out," the same words they'd left me. But now, it was a challenge, not a curse. On the 10th day, hunger won over pride. I walked into a diner called Ruby's off Highway 17, looking for a meal, and left with a job. The manager, Dolores, was in her 50s, stern, practical, the kind of woman who'd seen every kind of broken person come through her doors. She studied me for a long moment before saying, "You look like someone who knows how to work." I nodded. "Then grab an apron," she said. That night, I scrubbed dishes until my hands cracked. The pay was small, but she paid in cash. When I nearly fainted during the second shift, she caught me by the arm and pointed toward the back. "Go nap in the break room," she said. "I've seen worse." That tiny kindness saved me. I stayed at Ruby's for 6 months, working nights, saving every dollar. During breaks, I used the diner's Wi-Fi to apply for better jobs. I watched free YouTube tutorials on business law, marketing, coding, anything that could make me sharper. I kept a notebook filled with goals. Get ID. Open bank account. Find apartment. Rebuild portfolio. Each small checkmark became a victory. The first big break came when a regular customer, a quiet man in a suit, asked if I knew how to organize digital files. I told him I could. He offered me a temp job cleaning old data at his accounting firm. It paid triple what I earned at Ruby's. I said yes before he could change his mind. That job led to another and another. I learned fast. I arrived early, asked questions, stayed late. By the time I turned 25, I'd moved into a tiny studio apartment. The first night I slept on the floor because I couldn't afford furniture yet, but it was the best sleep of my life. No one could take it away. I built from there. I took night courses at the community college, earned new certifications, and started freelancing again, this time smarter. Every client, every contract I saved, copies. I kept records of every dollar. No one would ever blindside me again. My reputation grew slowly word of mouth from one satisfied client to the next. By 28, I had enough savings to launch a small consulting firm, Bennett Solutions Reimagined. This time, no investors, no family signatures. Just me and a folding table. I rented a modest office downtown and hung my first framed motto on the wall, "Failure is data. Study it." It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. I rebuilt everything they thought I'd destroyed, brick by brick, contract by contract, hour by unpaid hour. The hunger that once kept me awake now kept me moving. Every dollar was proof that I didn't need their name to survive. I didn't just figure it out. I mastered it. By 30, my company was turning profit. By 32, I owned the office space outright. By 35, I was consulting for the very firms that once rejected me. Every time I signed a contract, I thought of that empty house and that cruel note. They had erased me from their story, but I was writing a new one. And this time, I held the pen. Success came quietly, almost shyly, as if afraid I'd scare it off. One morning, I logged into my bank app and stared at the number on the screen, 7 figures. I thought it was an error. I refreshed the page 3 times before it sank in. I was a millionaire. Not in the flashy influencer way, not borrowed wealth or leased cars, but real solid savings, no debt, no one to answer to, no one who could take it away. I sat there in my office, sunlight spilling through the blinds, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not because I missed them, but because I didn't. I had survived without them. Thrived even. For a long time, I believed that meant the story was over. Then the past knocked on my inbox. It started with a subject line I hadn't seen in over a decade. "You're still our daughter." The email came from my mother. No greeting, no apology. Just a clinical paragraph about how she'd heard my name on a podcast interview. I'd recently been a guest on a show about resilience, talking about rebuilding after betrayal. The episode had gone viral. 1 million views in 4 days. My story, stripped of names, had reached places I didn't expect. Apparently, one of those places was their kitchen in Denver. My mother's email was short. "We'd like to talk. It's been a long time. Maybe we can fix things." Fix things. As if I'd misplaced a set of keys. I stared at the screen, pulse pounding the air in my chest, suddenly too thick. For 12 years, they hadn't reached out. Not a word when I was living in a storage unit. Not a call when I rebuilt my life from the ashes they left behind. But now that I was successful, they wanted to talk. My first instinct was to delete it. But curiosity is a cruel thing. It whispers even when you know better. I read it again. The tone was wrong, too detached, too polished. Then came another message, this time from Ethan. The subject line simply said, "We miss you." He wrote that he'd listened to the podcast and cried, that he'd been just a teenager when they left me, that he'd had no choice, that he'd looked me up over the years but didn't know how to reach out. He said seeing me successful made him proud. Proud. The word turned my stomach. Where had that pride been when I was sleeping in my car, when I was washing dishes just to eat? Still, something in me needed to know. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I wanted to prove I'd survived them. I typed 4 words in reply. "What changed, Ethan?" He responded within an hour. His message was longer this time. Apologies mixed with excuses. He said our parents' business had failed, that they were struggling, that his wife was pregnant again, and medical bills were piling up. And then I saw it, the truth, hidden between the lines. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They needed me. Money had finally made me visible again. I didn't reply. Not to him, not to her. But that night, lying awake in my apartment overlooking the city skyline I'd built my life upon, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired. Tired of their cycles, their sudden love whenever convenience struck. Tired of being the bridge they burned and then expected me to rebuild. The next morning, I opened my old safe, pulled out the yellowed note from years ago, the one that started it all. "You'll figure it out." I smiled bitterly. I had, and that was exactly why they were back. 10 days passed before I gave in to the pull of curiosity. I told myself it wasn't forgiveness, just research. Closure, maybe. I agreed to meet Ethan first, just him, no parents. I needed to see his face to know if he'd grown into a man or just aged into another version of our father. We chose a neutral spot, a coffee shop in Chicago, halfway between his city and mine. I arrived early, sitting near the window where I could watch every entrance. When he walked in, I recognized him instantly. Time had softened him, but not kinded him. He looked heavier, his once bright eyes dulled his smile, unsure. For a second, I thought he might hug me. He didn't. We just sat across from each other like strangers with shared DNA. The silence was excruciating. We talked about whether work his drive. When he asked about my company, I gave short answers. He seemed to be building courage for something bigger. Finally, he said it. "I'm sorry." The words trembled out of him like he wasn't sure they belonged to him. "I was just a kid, Nora. I didn't know they were planning to leave you." By the time I realized, it was too late. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But his story didn't fit the timeline. My father was methodical. He wouldn't have made a plan without everyone in on it. "Why me?" I asked quietly. Why was I the one left behind? Ethan looked down at his coffee cup. "They thought you'd be fine. You were always the strong one. Dad said you didn't need us like I did." His voice cracked on the last word, but I didn't feel pity. I felt fury. I told him about the storage unit, about eating peanut butter for weeks, about showering at the YMCA and working night shifts at 17. His face fell color draining from his cheeks. "I didn't know," he whispered. "They told me you were living with a friend's family, that you wanted to stay behind." Lies layered over lies, old and rotted. When he reached across the table, I pulled my hand back. I wasn't ready for comfort from the person who'd watched me vanish. We sat there both pretending this was progress, but it wasn't. He asked if I wanted to see Mom and Dad. I said no. He didn't argue. As we stood to leave, he hugged me. I didn't hug him back. I just stood there, arms limp, thinking of every time I'd rescued him growing up and how easily he'd let me drown. Back in my hotel room, I called my therapist, Melissa, and told her everything. She listened quietly before saying, "Nora, remorse isn't accountability. Don't confuse the two." She was right. Ethan had cried, but his tears didn't cost him anything. He still had his family, his wife, his home. He hadn't lost 12 years. I had. The next evening, my mother called. I hadn't given her my number. Ethan must have. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity is poison. Her voice was softer than I remembered, older, raspier. "Nora, sweetheart," she said, as if the last decade hadn't happened. "I'm so proud of you. I always knew you'd make it." I let her talk, her words flowing like sugar syrup, sweet and sticky. She said they'd been struggling, that life had been hard since their business failed, that they'd prayed for me every night. Then I asked the question that had lived in my chest since that night. "Why did you leave me?" The silence stretched long enough that I thought she might hang up. Finally, she said, "We couldn't afford 3 mouths to feed. You were smart enough to survive. We thought social services would help you. We did what we had to do." I hung up without another word. That wasn't love. That was cowardice dressed as logic. For the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt cold, the kind of cold that settles deep and stays. That night, I tore up her email, burned the pieces in my kitchen sink, and watched the ashes curl. They had made their choice 12 years ago. And this time, I would make mine. The next morning, an email from my father arrived like a punch. The subject line read, "Time to talk." My hands shook before I even opened it. The message wasn't an apology. It was a ledger. He wrote about how hard things had been since the Denver project went south, about mounting debts, medical bills, and your mother's condition. He said I was blessed with abundance and that it was my turn to give back. Not a single word about leaving me. Not one acknowledgement of what they'd done, just a request, no an expectation for financial help. I read it 3 times before forwarding it to Melissa's subject line. And there it is. She called immediately. "Don't answer," she said. "This isn't about reconciliation. It's about control." I knew she was right. Still, a small, foolish part of me hoped he'd say something human, something real. But it never came. Instead, another email arrived that night, this time from Ethan. "Dad didn't mean to sound harsh," he wrote. "He's under pressure. Maybe you could help out. Just this once." He ended with the phrase that had been used to cage me my whole life. "Family takes care of family." I didn't reply. I didn't sleep either. Their words played like static in my head, a cruel echo of every guilt trip I'd ever endured. By sunrise, I knew what I had to do. I opened my laptop and typed a calm, clear message to Ethan. "I'm willing to have a relationship with you and your family, but with clear boundaries. No money, no loans, no financial support of any kind, and no contact with our parents until they take full responsibility for what they did." I hit send before I could second guess it. His reply came 15 minutes later. "I'm really disappointed, Nora. Our parents are struggling. You're being selfish. You've changed." The words blurred on my screen. Selfish, the same accusation they'd thrown at me since childhood every time I said no. I closed the laptop and sat in silence, feeling the weight of it all pressing down. That afternoon, I booked an appointment with Melissa. She listened, nodding slowly, then said, "Boundaries sound cruel to people who benefited from your lack of them." That line stuck with me. It still does. The next day, I booked a solo flight to Bali. It wasn't about escape. It was about breathing. I needed distant salt air and silence to remember who I was, for their voices filled every corner of my head. I spent 2 weeks there, walking beaches, hiking cliffs, meditating under skies that stretched forever. I didn't check email. I didn't answer calls. I just existed. When I came back, I felt lighter, sharper, unafraid. Until I saw the 6 new messages waiting for me. 5 from my father, 1 from Ethan. I didn't read most of them. I could tell by the subject lines, "Please reconsider," "Don't be cruel," "Remember who raised you," but one caught my eye. "We're coming." My stomach dropped. I opened it. "Your mother needs you," he wrote. "We're driving to see you. We deserve a chance to explain." No dates, no details. Just a warning dressed as entitlement. My pulse spiked. I forwarded it to Melissa and my lawyer Marcus, then called my building security to put them on alert. "If anyone named Bennett shows up, I told the doorman, do not let them upstairs." He agreed, concern flickering in his voice. That night, I slept with my phone on silent and a baseball bat by my bed, not because I thought they'd hurt me, but because I knew how far desperation could drive people who believed they were owed something. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was a war for peace. A war I didn't start, but one I would end on my terms. It started with pounding. Not gentle knocking, not pleading voices, real pounding like someone trying to break through the past with their fists. Thursday morning, 8:47 a.m. I froze mid-step, coffee mug trembling in my hand. Then my phone rang, unknown number flashing. I let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, the sound came again, 3 hard knocks. I crept toward the door, heart hammering. Through the peephole, I saw them. My parents, standing side by side in the hallway like ghosts that refused to stay buried. My mother's hair had gone silver gray, her eyes red and puffy. My father looked thinner, but his expression was the same, controlled, irritated, entitled. "Nora, please," my mother called. "We just want to talk." "We know you're in there," my father added. "Don't be childish." My voice caught somewhere between fear and fury. Childish? They had abandoned me as a child, and now they accused me of acting like one. I didn't answer. I sat on the floor with my back to the door, trembling. After a while, their voices softened, then faded. I listened until the elevator doors finally closed. Only then did I breathe again. I called security. They confirmed my parents had left, but advised calling the police if they returned. I hung up and immediately called Melissa. She arrived 30 minutes later, sandwich in hand, no judgment in her eyes. "You did the right thing," she said. "That wasn't a visit. That was harassment." I nodded, tears burning at the corners of my eyes. "They'll twist it," I said. "They'll make it sound like I'm cruel." Melissa's expression hardened. "Cruelty is abandoning your daughter and pretending she never existed. Protecting yourself isn't cruelty, it's recovery." That night, I blocked every unknown number, but the messages still came new emails from Ethan claiming I'd humiliated our parents. He said they were staying in a cheap motel, that Mom had been crying all night, that Dad was sick with worry. His words were daggers wrapped in guilt. I deleted them all. Friday morning, I decided to leave town. I booked a flight to Portland to stay with my friend Rachel, the one who had helped me during my lowest years. She didn't hesitate when I called. "My couch is yours as long as you need," she said. I packed quickly, shoving clothes into a suitcase, my hands shaking. Then my phone rang again. It was my doorman. "There's a woman downstairs, says she's having chest pains," he said. "She's asking for you, says she's your mother." I went cold. "Call an ambulance," I told him, "but I'm not coming down." He hesitated. "She looks bad, Ms. Bennett." My voice cracked, but I forced myself to stay steady. "Call 911, please." I paced the apartment until the sirens faded in the distance. When I finally stepped into the hallway, the air felt heavier, like guilt had weight. At the airport that evening, my phone buzzed again, Ethan. I almost ignored it, but some instinct made me answer. His voice was ragged, panicked. "She's in surgery. Mom had a heart attack. This is your fault." Then he hung up. The words hit like a slap. For a moment, I just stood there in the terminal, surrounded by strangers boarding flights, feeling the old reflex rise, the urge to rush back to fix it, to play the good daughter. Then Melissa's voice echoed in my head. "You are not responsible for their pain." I took a deep breath, boarded my plane, and turned off my phone. Rachel met me at the Portland airport with open arms and wine. "You're shaking," she said. "I'm fine," I lied. That night, as we sat on her porch under the soft drizzle of Oregon rain, I told her everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every guilt trip. She listened quietly before saying, "They don't want forgiveness, Nora. They want control. Don't give it to them." The next morning, an email waited in my inbox. From my father. "She's stable. Don't you think you've punished us enough?" I stared at it for a long time, then hit delete. I didn't owe them my presence, my comfort, or my peace. I'd spent too many years paying debts they invented. This time, I was done. When I returned home 3 days later, there were flowers waiting outside my apartment door. White lilies, the same kind from my childhood home. The card read, "Please call us. We're staying at the Holiday Inn until Wednesday." I didn't touch them. I carried the bouquet straight to the trash chute and let it drop, but their persistence didn't stop there. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of my mother lying in a hospital bed, pale and fragile-looking, her eyes closed. The message below said, "She might not have much time left. Do you really want to live with this regret?" I stared at it for a full minute before blocking the number. I wasn't sure what was real anymore, if she was sick, if she'd recovered, if any of this was truth or theater. Manipulation was their native language. I called Melissa, my voice shaking. She sighed softly. "They're escalating. You need to protect your peace, Nora. Take a social media break. Change your number if you have to." I agreed. I even started packing another small bag to stay with Rachel again. But before I could leave, the doorman called up once more. "Ms. Bennett, there's a woman downstairs asking for you. Says she's your sister-in-law. She has a child with her." My breath caught. Sister-in-law Ethan's wife. I told him to send her up. A few minutes later, there was a knock. When I opened the door, the woman standing there looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, dark circles shadowed her eyes, and a sleeping toddler rested against her shoulder. "I'm Jenny," she said quietly. "Michael's sorry, Ethan's wife. May I come in?" Her voice trembled on the edges, but not from fear, from exhaustion. I nodded and stepped aside. She walked in slowly, laid her daughter on the couch, and covered her with a blanket from her bag. Then she sat at my kitchen table, clutching her water glass like it was an anchor. "I came alone," she said. "I didn't tell them I was coming. I need to tell you something. I studied her face, searching for deceit, but all I saw was shame. I only learned about you 3 years ago, she began. Ethan told me you'd run away at 17, that you were unstable, that your parents tried to help you but you refused. I believed him, until I heard your podcast. She swallowed hard. I confronted him and he admitted the truth that they'd left you behind, that they lied for years. I'm so sorry. My throat tightened, but I said nothing. She continued, her voice steadier now. Your parents, they've been telling people you stole from them before disappearing, that they spent years searching for you. They've posted about it on Facebook, old photos, pleas for help finding their troubled daughter. They made themselves look like victims. When your podcast blew up, people started asking questions. They're terrified you'll expose them. She unlocked her phone and showed me the post's carefully written pleas for sympathy dated years after my abandonment. My father writing, "We won't give up until we find our Nora." My mother commenting, "Please pray for our lost child." Each one a lie, layered on top of another. They admitted it to me, Jenny said, voice trembling again. When I threatened to tell the truth, they begged me not to. They said it would destroy them, but I can't keep quiet anymore. You deserve to know. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time, genuine remorse. Why tell me now, I asked. Because they're unraveling, she said simply. They're desperate. They've already started turning on Ethan, blaming him for everything. They'll drag you both down if they can. Her daughter stirred on the couch, murmuring softly in her sleep. Jenny looked at her and smiled weakly. I don't want my kids growing up around that kind of poison. I want them to know you someday if you want that. For the first time in years, I felt something close to warmth flicker inside me. Maybe not trust, but hope. After she left, the apartment felt heavy again. I called Melissa and told her everything. She was quiet for a long time, then said, Abusers always rewrite the narrative. When you tell the truth, they panic. You're seeing the consequence of truth meeting denial. I nodded, my eyes fixed on the city lights outside my window. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just a family mess anymore, it was exposure. They had lied for 12 years, built reputations on it, and now their empire of deceit was collapsing. They wanted control. I wanted peace, but peace was no longer enough. I wanted the truth to stand where their lies once lived. The first sign that things were about to spiral came 2 days later. An email from my father. The subject line, "Final warning." My chest tightened before I even opened it. The body of the message was short, almost businesslike. If you continue spreading lies about our family, we'll sue for defamation. We have proof you stole from us. Take down your podcast statements and issue a public apology, or we'll go to the media. Below his signature was a single line that chilled me. Family matters should stay in the family. I stared at the screen, pulse thudding. Proof. There was no proof because there was no theft. He was bluffing, but the threat wasn't empty. I forwarded the email to Marcus, my lawyer, then to Melissa. Within minutes, Marcus called. Don't respond, he said. Empty threats. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Save everything. If they push this, we'll crush it. His tone was calm, confident, but I could feel the tension building under my skin. My parents were cornered, and desperate people are dangerous. That night, I didn't sleep. Every sound in the hallway made me flinch. Every vibration from my phone felt like a warning. When I finally drifted off, it wasn't rest, it was exhaustion. The next morning, I woke to a new voicemail, Ethan's voice trembling. They're losing it, Nora. They're saying terrible things about Jenny now. Dad grabbed her arm last night, left a bruise. We kicked them out. They're living in a motel. I think they might do something stupid. Please call me. Use Jenny's phone. Don't text mine. I called Marcus first. You need a controlled meeting, he said. Public recorded with me present. Let's get them talking on the record. We arranged it for the next day at a cafe near his office. Ethan and Jenny agreed to come. My parents weren't invited. When they arrived, I barely recognized them. Jenny's sleeve was rolled halfway up, revealing faint purple marks. Ethan looked wrecked, his voice hoarse from stress. They've been calling non-stop, he said, showing up at my job, saying I've betrayed them. They know where we live. Marcus asked precise questions, financial ties, house keys, passwords. Ethan admitted they'd co-signed his mortgage, still had access to his accounts, even knew his security codes. Marcus scribbled notes, his jaw tight. "You need to cut every tie," he said. "Today." Jenny nodded quickly. "We will. I can't live like this anymore." As they spoke, I realized something strange. The anger I'd carried for years was shifting. I didn't feel rage toward Ethan anymore, only a deep, exhausted sadness. We were both survivors of the same family, just wounded in different ways. Before leaving, Ethan turned to me. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For all of it." This time I believed him. I didn't say I forgave him, but I didn't need to. The truth hung between us enough for now. That night, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. My father's voice came through low and venomous. "You think you can destroy us. We gave you life. You'll regret this, Nora." Then he hung up. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down. For a long time, I just sat there in the dark, breathing through the adrenaline. The next morning, Marcus filed for restraining orders for me, for Ethan, for Jenny, and for their daughter. He called a detective friend to review the break-in report from Ethan's house. If they cross a line, he said, we'll have them arrested. I nodded numb, but determined. This was no longer about reconciliation or revenge. It was about protection of my peace, my safety, and the new family that was finally forming out of the wreckage. That evening, we all met again, me, Ethan, Jenny, and their little girl. We sat around my living room, Lily building towers from toy blocks as we talked quietly about next steps, changing locks, new bank accounts, new numbers, maybe even moving to a new city. It wasn't the family I grew up with, but it was real. It was chosen. As Lily laughed, toppling her tower, I felt something shift inside me, a small, fragile sense of belonging, the kind that's earned, not inherited. For the first time in years, I let myself smile. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. My father's voice still echoed in my head, cold and certain. "You'll regret this." I didn't know what form his threat would take, only that it was coming. It came 3 nights later. 2:13 a.m. The shrill sound of my phone slicing through the dark. I jolted awake, my heart racing. The caller ID said Jenny. I answered on the second ring, already bracing myself. Her voice was broken, hysterical. "They broke in. Nora. They broke into our house." I sat up so fast I nearly dropped the phone. "Where are you now?" "At a neighbor's. I called the police. They're on their way." Her words came out in sobs. "They took Lily's baby photos, Michael's laptop, important papers, our passports. They left a note." "What did it say?" I asked, dread curling low in my stomach. It said, "Family matters should stay in the family." My blood went cold. "I'm coming," I said, throwing on clothes. "Don't." "Marcus said to stay safe until police arrive," she pleaded. But I was already grabbing my keys. "Text me your address again." When I got there, blue and red lights flashed across the street. The front door hung open, splintered. Inside, the air smelled like fear, like overturned drawers and violated safety. Jenny was standing near the kitchen table, shaking. Ethan sat on the couch, his face pale, his eyes blank. An officer was taking notes while another walked through the house with a flashlight. I told them Jenny whispered when she saw me. I told them my in-laws did this. They didn't believe me. The officer looked skeptical when I approached. "Ma'am, do you have proof of who did this?" "Yes," I said. "Their fingerprints will be everywhere." He hesitated. "Family cases are tricky." I felt anger ignite in my chest. Breaking and entering isn't tricky. It's a felony. He didn't argue, but didn't promise much either. When they left, Marcus arrived, still in his suit, looking exhausted but focused. "We'll file an emergency restraining order first thing in the morning," he said. "But tonight you don't stay here." I nodded. "They're coming with me." We packed essentials while Marcus took photos of the damage. I noticed the details, my mother's handwriting on the note, the familiar way she looped her Ys. It made me nauseous. These weren't strangers. They were the people who taught me to read. When we reached my building, I alerted security again. "No one under the Bennett name comes upstairs," I said. The doorman nodded grimly. Inside, we settled Lily on the couch with a blanket. Jenny made tea with trembling hands. Ethan just sat head in his palms. "It's my fault," he said softly. "I should have protected them better. I should have stood up to them years ago." I looked at him, my voice steady. "We both should have, but we can't fix the past, only protect the present." That night we didn't sleep. Marcus called early the next morning. "It's done," he said. "The restraining orders are filed for all of you. Court hearing next week for permanence. The detective is interested. He's seen similar intimidation cases before." "What do we do until then?" I asked. "Document everything. Don't engage." He paused. "And be careful." By afternoon, Jenny and I had transformed my apartment into a makeshift safe house. Extra locks, curtains drawn, doors bolted. Lily built little forts in the living room, blissfully unaware. We cooked dinner together, trying to make normal out of chaos. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful until the doorman called. "Ms. Bennett, there's a delivery for you. Flowers again." My stomach dropped. "Check the card," I said. He read it aloud. "We know where you all are. This isn't over." I closed my eyes, bile rising in my throat. "Send them back. Call the police if the delivery person refuses." That night I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The line between fear and fury blurred until they became the same thing. My parents had destroyed my childhood, stolen my security, and now they were coming for my peace. But this time they weren't dealing with a scared 17-year-old girl. I spent the next 2 days preparing for court organizing emails, threats, photos, everything Marcus would need. I even printed the note they'd left at Ethan's house, tucked it in a folder labeled Evidence Emotional Abuse Pattern. The night before the hearing, Marcus called. "The judge is good," he said, straightforward. "Empathetic to family trauma cases. You'll be safe." His confidence steadied me. Still, I barely slept. At sunrise, Jenny made coffee. Ethan straightened his tie. Lily kissed my cheek and said, "Don't be scared, Auntie Nora. You're brave." I smiled at her, but my throat tightened. Brave wasn't what I felt. I felt exhausted. Hollow, but ready. As we walked into the courthouse that morning hand in hand, I realized this wasn't just about justice. It was about reclaiming my narrative. For every time they'd called me a liar, for every year they'd made me question my worth, for every empty kitchen and cruel note, the law would finally speak where they had silenced me. It was time for the reckoning. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and polished wood, a sterile calm that somehow made my pulse race faster. We arrived early, me, Ethan, Jenny, and Marcus. We sat together on a long oak bench, the hum of distant conversations filling the air. I stared at the polished floor, tracing the reflection of the fluorescent lights, until my eyes blurred. When the clerk called our case, everything inside me went still. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We're ready," he whispered. We stood, walked toward the front, and took our places. Across the aisle, my parents sat side by side, older, smaller, but still radiating that same cold confidence I remembered from every childhood dinner where they'd let silence do the talking. My mother wore pearls. My father wore the same gray suit from my graduation. For a second, a flash of grief pierced me, not for them, but for what they could have been. Then it was gone. The judge entered, a woman with kind but sharp eyes. She read our petition silently before speaking. "Ms. Bennett, Mr. Bennett, I've reviewed your filings. Let's hear from counsel." Marcus stepped forward first, voice steady, professional. He laid everything out: the break-in, the harassment, the threats, the flowers, the emails, the manipulation, the 12 years of documented estrangement. He handed over exhibits, photographs, printouts, voicemail transcripts, the Facebook posts where my parents had painted me as missing to gain sympathy. "This is a clear pattern of intimidation and emotional abuse," Marcus said. "The respondents have repeatedly violated boundaries, engaged in stalking behavior, and endangered not just my client but her extended family." He glanced at me. "This isn't reconciliation. It's control masquerading as love." When it was their turn, my father stood slowly. "Your Honor," he began, voice gravelly and composed, "this has been exaggerated. We are not criminals. We're parents trying to reconnect with a difficult daughter who's turned her back on her family." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "We just wanted a second chance," she whispered. "We love her." The judge listened, expression unreadable. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "are you denying you entered your son's home without permission?" He hesitated. "We were just retrieving family documents." "And did you or did you not send threatening messages?" she pressed. "Those were taken out of context." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Context does not erase intimidation." Then she turned to me. "Ms. Bennett, would you like to speak?" My throat went dry. I stood feeling every eye in the room on me. "Your Honor," I said softly, 12 years ago my parents moved 2 states away without telling me. They left a note that said, 'You'll figure it out.' I was 17. I spent months sleeping in my car, working nights, building my life from nothing. They never called, never wrote, never cared. And now that I've built something, they've returned not to make amends, but to take." I took a breath, forcing my voice to stay even. They didn't just abandon me once. They've done it again and again. The threats, the lies online, the break-ins, the manipulation, it's all part of the same pattern. They want to rewrite history. But I have the evidence, and today I want it on record that I am done living in their shadow. The room was silent except for the faint buzz of the lights. My father stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman standing there. Maybe he didn't. The judge nodded once, then spoke. "After reviewing the evidence and hearing testimony, I find in favor of the petitioners. The restraining orders are granted 3 years, no contact, no messages, no visits. Any violation will result in immediate arrest." My mother's face crumpled. My father muttered something under his breath, jaw tight, knuckles white. But I didn't look back. Not this time. As we walked out of the courtroom, sunlight poured through the tall glass doors, warm and bright. Marcus shook my hand. "You did well," he said. "You're free now." I didn't feel free yet, but I believed I could be. Ethan hugged me on the courthouse steps, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry," he said again. "For everything." I hugged him back. "Let's just do better," I said. "That's all that matters now." A few weeks passed in silence. No calls, no messages, just quiet. Real clean quiet, the kind that heals instead of haunts. Marcus confirmed the detective had closed the investigation. My parents had packed up their motel room and left the state, where no one knew. Maybe they'd found another story to tell another audience to manipulate. I didn't care anymore. What mattered was that they were gone. Ethan and Jenny found a new house closer to mine. Lily started preschool. Every Sunday we had dinner together. Nothing fancy, just laughter, homemade food, and peace. One evening, as the sun set over my balcony, Jenny handed me an envelope. "This came through Marcus's office," she said. Inside was a letter from my mother. No threats, no demands, just ink on paper, shaky handwriting that didn't sound like the woman I'd known. "We hurt you deeply. We failed you. We understand if you never want to see us again. We're getting help. We hope someday you find peace, even if it's not with us." I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer, unsure whether it was truth or manipulation, but knowing it didn't matter. Forgiveness, I'd learned, didn't require access. It required distance. 6 months later, life felt steady again. My business expanded, my friendships deepened, and my Sundays became sacred. Slow mornings, laughter, the smell of coffee instead of fear. Sometimes when Lily giggled as Ethan spun her around the living room, I'd think of that note from so long ago. 4 words written in my father's hand. "You'll figure it out." And I had. Not the way they meant. I figured out that family isn't blood. It's choice. It's safety. It's love without debt. I figured out that freedom is quiet, boundaries are sacred, and forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back in, it means letting yourself move on. I figured out that survival isn't the end of the story. Peace is. And for the first time since that night in the empty house, I finally believed I was home. If you've ever had to rebuild your life from ashes to stand up when the very people who should have lifted you only pushed you down, then you understand Nora's silence at the end. Sometimes peace isn't about reconciliation. It's about reclaiming your name. Family isn't always blood. It's who shows up when everything burns. What would you have done in her place? Would you have forgiven them? Or walked away for good? Tell me what you think in the comments and let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing this community of quiet fighters across every city, every time zone. If Nora's story reminded you that strength is learned, not given, tap the like button and subscribe for more true stories about justice, survival, and second chances. Your story might be the next one we tell.